So, um, imagine walking out your front door right now. Just picture your neighborhood.
Right, like the coffee shop on the corner, the roads you drive on every day.
Exactly, the central downtown area where, your local government operates.
Yeah.
Now imagine all of it is just gone.
Just wiped out.
Yeah, not just damaged, but reduced to literal ash and rubble.
Hmm.
The power grid is offline forever. The institutions that protected you have completely dissolved.
It's hard to even picture.
It is, and the desperation is so suffocating that you are suddenly, handing over your entire life savings just to get a cup of drinking water in your own hometown.
See, the human brain struggles to even compute that level of overnight devastation. I mean, we take the invisible scaffolding of our lives completely for granted.
Well, for sure, supply chains, laws.
Exactly, the physical infrastructure.
Yeah.
And when those structures are violently stripped away, the psychological shock is just absolute. You aren't just losing your property, you're losing the very definition of reality that you've relied on since birth.
Which is terrifying. And, well, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are exploring a bilingual Hebrew-English manuscript of the Book of Lamentations.
Yeah, and we are not just looking at it as some dusty ancient history lesson, right?
Right. We are looking at the hidden mathematical architecture of the Hebrew language itself to answer one really profound question. How does a human mind process the end of the world?
It's a heavy topic.
Extremely heavy. We're going to examine the visceral historical reality of a ruined city and the incredibly disciplined art that survivors use to contain their unimaginable trauma.
So to really grasp the gravity of this text, we have to look at the stark contrast it paints right out of the gate.
Yeah, chapter 1.
Right, the author doesn't ease you into the tragedy at all. Chapter 1, verse 1 drops you immediately into the aftermath. It establishes the staggering scale of this macro collapse.
The writer says, how doth the city sit solitary that was full of people? How is she become as a widow? She that was great among the nations and princess among the provinces, how has she become tributary?
The imagery there is just devastating.
It really is. It reads like someone wandering through a post-apocalyptic ghost town that literally just yesterday was the thriving capital of a global superpower.
And calling the city a widow is such a specific, terrifying metaphor for the ancient world.
Because, in that era, a widow wasn't just someone who was grieving.
Right. She was someone who had lost her ultimate social and legal protection. She was suddenly and entirely vulnerable to the elements and, to predators.
Wow. And that vulnerability plays out in intensely physical ways throughout the text, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The writer is documenting the absolute obliteration of the city's defenses by the invading Babylonian Empire.
Because when an ancient superpower like Babylon laid siege to a city like Jerusalem, they didn't just, defeat the army.
No, they dismantled the society's physical sense of security entirely. Chapter 2, verse 8 tells us the Lord hath made the rampart and wall to mourn, they languish together.
Which immediately leads into verse 9, giving us this incredibly final image. It says, her gates are sunk into the ground, he hath destroyed and broken her bars.
That detail is so specific.
It always stops me. Sunk into the ground, not just burned, but intentionally, laboriously pressed into the earth.
Yeah, and for an ancient city, you have to remember the gates weren't just the front door.
Right, they were the courthouse, weren't they?
Exactly. They were the central market. They were where the city council met. So losing the gates meant losing the city's identity as a functioning sovereign entity.
So it's basically the equivalent of waking up to find your Supreme Court, your stock exchange, and your military headquarters all leveled in a single afternoon.
That's a perfect way to put it. The entire social hierarchy collapses right alongside the stone.
And the text notes that her king and her princes are among the nations. Instruction is no more.
Right. The leadership has been dragged away into exile, and the spiritual infrastructure is completely defiled too.
Yeah. Chapter 1, verse 10 points out that heathens have invaded the sanctuary.
Which is huge. People who were historically forbidden from even entering the sacred congregation are now just wandering around casually looting its most holy treasures.
It's a total blackout of guidance. The government is gone, the military is exiled, the religious institutions are ransacked.
And you see the psychological weight of this in chapter 2, verse 10. It says, the elders, the wisdom keepers of the society, sit upon the ground and keep silence. They have cast up dust upon their heads.
I picture these esteemed leaders, people you would normally look to in a crisis, just sitting in the dirt, completely mute.
Yeah, there are no answers left, only dust.
Man. But when a city loses its walls and its leaders, it's not just the stone and the laws that break down right. It is the supply chain.
And that physical destruction immediately triggers a horrific biological reality inside the city limits.
Because a siege in the ancient world wasn't, a gentleman's battle of armies crossing swords on a field.
Not at all. It was a calculated, agonizing strangulation of a civilian population. The entire goal was to cut off the food and water until the city simply consumed itself from the inside out.
And the indignity of that reality is where this manuscript refuses to let us keep any emotional distance. Like, look at chapter 5, verse 4.
Right. The survivors are lamenting. We have drunk our water for money. Our wood cometh to us for price.
These are people trapped in their own homeland, being extorted for the most basic, fundamental elements of survival.
Having to hand over whatever meager wealth you have left just to take a sip of water from your own well.
It's unthinkable. And the progression of the famine, detailed in the text, captures the brutal, terrifying stages of human starvation.
It starts with this general feverish exhaustion. Chapter 5, verse 10 says, "Our skin is hot like an oven because of the burning heat of famine."
Wow. So that is the physical manifestation of starvation setting in.
Yes. The body literally begins consuming its own tissues. You run a constant fever as the organs start shutting down.
And naturally, the people who succumb first are the ones with the fewest reserves.
Which is the most heartbreaking part.
Chapter 2 gives us some of the most gut-wrenching, unvarnished reporting I've ever read. The narrator says his eyes fill with tears and his insides burn because the young children and the sucklings swoon in the broad places of the city.
We're talking about toddlers and infants literally passing out in the public squares.
And they look up at their mothers and ask, "Where is corn and wine?"
They are asking for the staples of a normal, everyday harvest. The young mind is completely unable to comprehend the macro-political collapse of the Babylonian siege.
Right, they don't understand geopolitics. They just know their stomachs are empty and their parents aren't feeding them.
And the verse concludes by describing these children pouring out their souls into their mother's bosoms. They are dying in the arms of the people who are biologically wired to protect them.
People who are now utterly powerless to do so.
Exactly.
I have to be honest, I was reading through the translation and I hit chapter 4, verse 10, and I actually had to stop and reread it a few times.
Yeah, that verse it's incredibly difficult.
I wasn't sure I was understanding it correctly, or maybe hoping I was mistranslating it in my head. It plainly states, "The hands of women full of compassion have sodden their own children. They were their food in the destruction of the daughter of my people." By sodden, it literally means boiled, doesn't it?
It does. It absolutely does. It forces us to confront the total, terrifying breakdown of human nature under extreme duress.
But the detail that makes it so chilling is that the writer specifically calls them women full of compassion.
Right.
The text goes out of its way to tell us these weren't monsters. These weren't sociopaths. These were loving, normal mothers who were driven so far past the brink of starvation, madness, and grief that they committed the ultimate inversion of nature just to survive another afternoon.
And that phrase, full of compassion, is really the psychological linchpin of the horror here.
How so?
Well, trauma and starvation at this scale do not just destroy bodies. They destroy the very fabric of human morality. It erases who you fundamentally are.
Wow.
When the biological imperative to survive clashes with a prolonged, inescapable siege, the resulting actions defy our modern capacity for empathy. The society has been reduced to its most primal, unrecognizable state.
Which actually brings up a massive contradiction for me.
Oh, what's that?
If you are the writer and you were sitting in the ashes of this city, watching children starve, watching mothers turn to cannibalism, how do you even hold a pen?
That is the big question.
Because usually when people panic, when they're overwhelmed by trauma, their communication becomes frantic. It gets disorganized. It fractures into a chaotic stream of consciousness.
Yeah, you expect yelling. You expect incoherence.
Right. I don't understand how someone writes poetry while their city is actively burning.
It seems totally counterintuitive, doesn't it? When the mind is in chaos, you'd expect the output to be equally chaotic. But the structural discipline of Lamentations is perhaps its most remarkable feature.
The author does the exact opposite of a panicked rant.
Exactly.
Visually, looking at the Hebrew side of this bilingual manuscript, there is an immediate, rhythmic drumbeat of mourning.
Yes, it starts with the word Ica, which translates to how.
Right. How doth the city sit solitary?
How hath the Lord covered with a cloud the daughter of Zion?
How is the gold become dim? It opens chapters 1, 2, and 4. It says this incredibly heavy, consistent wail right at the top of the text.
And that word Ica is actually the traditional Hebrew name for the Book of Lamentations itself. It's a word reserved almost exclusively for funerals and dirges.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. But the architecture goes so much deeper than just a repeating opening word. If I direct your attention to the first letters of the Hebrew verses provided in the text for chapters 1, 2, and 4, an incredibly rigorous mathematical pattern emerges.
I noticed this in the notes, and it's fascinating. Chapter 1. Verse 1 starts with the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph.
Correct.
Verse 2 starts with the second letter, Bet. Verse 3 starts with the third, Gimel. And this continues sequentially through the entire 22-letter Hebrew alphabet.
Every single letter.
Each chapter is exactly 22 verses long, perfectly structured as an alphabetic acrostic. And, I mean, here is the tragedy of reading this only in English. The translation completely destroys that visual architecture.
It really does. If you're only reading the English side of the manuscript, you're missing the very structure that holds the grief together.
You're completely blind to the foundational framework.
The English translation conveys the horror of the siege, but the original Hebrew conveys the psychological coping mechanism of the survivor.
But, okay, let me play devil's advocate here.
Go ahead.
Doesn't an alphabetized poem feel a bit, I don't know, cold or artificial?
How do you mean?
Well, you are witnessing the most unimaginable atrocities. Your neighbors are dying, and you decide, hold on, I need to make sure this next sentence starts with a Gimel. Why impose that kind of rigid academic rule on yourself in the middle of a disaster?
I get why you'd ask that. It feels cold until you understand the psychology of trauma.
Okay, unpack that for me.
The author is experiencing the most chaotic, uncontainable, world-ending grief imaginable. The physical world has lost all its rules, all its boundaries.
The government is gone, the laws are gone, the walls are gone.
Exactly. So by forcing this grief into the strictest possible linguistic container, the alphabet itself, the writer is reclaiming a tiny fraction of order.
Oh, wow.
When the external world is entirely out of your control, you control the only thing you have left, the structure of your words.
It's like building a lead box to hold radioactive material. The grief is an explosion, and if you don't give it a heavy, dense container, it will just obliterate you completely.
That is a brilliant analogy, yes. The alphabet represents the totality of language from A to Z, or in this case, from Aleph to Tav.
Right.
By using every letter sequentially, the writer is essentially saying, my sorrow encompasses everything from the beginning to the end. I am going to express it completely, leaving absolutely nothing out, but I am going to contain it.
That reframes the entire text for me.
It prevents the grief from dissolving into a formless, endless scream. It turns that scream into a lasting monument.
The structure isn't an artistic flourish, it's a survival tactic.
Precisely.
But if you have this incredibly rigid structure containing such relentless, suffocating darkness, you inevitably start looking for a turning point.
You need a breath of air.
Yeah. And as we move into the geographic center of the text, to chapter 3, the tone takes a massive jarring pivot.
Chapter 3 is really the emotional and theological core of the book. And the structure actually intensifies here, strangely enough.
Wait, how does it intensify?
Instead of each verse starting with a sequential letter, the author groups them in threes. So the first 3 verses start with Aleph, the next 3 with Bet, and so on.
Oh, wow. So the structure is becoming even more pronounced right as the theological pivot happens.
Exactly.
And the pivot itself is wild. Right in the middle of describing death, starvation, and ashes, chapter 3, verse 21 suddenly declares, "This I recall to my mind, therefore have I hope."
It's a shocking line.
The first time I read that, I was genuinely confused. Hope. Based on what evidence? Is the writer suddenly pretending everything is going to be okay?
It is definitely not a naive Hollywood happy ending, but it is a massive theological stand. Following that declaration of hope, we get the most famous verses in the entire text.
Right, verses 22 and 23.
They say, surely the Lord's mercies are not consumed. Surely his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness.
New every morning. That is a phrase you see printed on coffee mugs, woven into throw pillows, stamped on inspirational posters.
You see it everywhere.
But when you strip away the modern commercialization and look at the actual context, it's staggering.
The context changes the meaning of the words entirely. This isn't a wealthy, comfortable person writing about how beautiful the sunrise is from their porch.
Yeah.
This is someone sitting in the smoldering ruins of their entire civilization. They are starving, their friends are dead, their leaders are exiled.
And yet they are making a conscious, defiant choice to recall the foundational nature of their God.
The writer is declaring that even though their current physical reality is total destruction, the ultimate eternal reality of mercy still exists somewhere above the ash.
Verse 24 drives that home. The Lord is my portion, therefore will I hope in him.
Yes.
A portion is an inheritance, a piece of land, a physical asset. It's almost like the writer's acknowledging that they have been stripped of every single physical possession, every comfort, every security.
Everything is gone.
So they have stripped their faith down to the absolute studs. They have nothing left but the concept of God itself.
It is an incredibly resilient faith, tested in the ultimate crucible. However, it is vital that we don't romanticize this moment and pretend it resolves the trauma.
Right, because the book does not end with chapter 3.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't neatly tie up the grief with a bow of hope.
There are 2 more full chapters of lamenting after that moment of clarity. And you pointed at something in the notes about chapter 5 that completely blew my mind.
About the structure.
Yes. The architectural structure, we just spent all this time marveling at it, fractures.
The container finally gives way. Chapter 5 still has exactly 22 verses mirroring the length of the Hebrew alphabet. But the acrostic pattern is broken.
The verses no longer start sequentially, from Aleph to Tav.
No. The mathematical order just vanishes.
I find that so incredibly honest.
Yeah.
It's like the neat, orderly coping mechanism is finally buckling under the sheer weight of the long-term reality.
That's a great observation. The adrenaline of the initial disaster has worn off. The long, grueling years of exile are setting in.
And the rigid structure they built to hold the pain is starting to crack.
The final chapter shifts from a highly structured individual meditation into a deeply vulnerable, disorganized, communal plea.
It's a collective cry for restoration.
And the ending of the text is purposefully, painfully unresolved.
Verse 21 sounds so hopeful at first glance. They cry out, "Turn thou us unto thee, O Lord, and we shall be turned. Renew our days as of old."
You expect the book to end right there on a note of restoration.
But then, the absolute final breath of the manuscripts, verse 22, hits you with this haunting caveat. They say, "Thou canst not have utterly rejected us and be exceeding wroth against us."
It's a note of raw terror. It essentially translates to, restore us to our former days unless, of course, you have completely rejected us and are entirely, eternally angry with us.
Wow.
The writer is leaving the very real possibility on the table that they might not be saved, that this really might be the absolute end of their people.
It is an incredibly brave way to end a religious text, refusing to offer a fake, comfortable resolution.
It just leaves you hanging right there in the tension of the unknown.
To pull all these threads together for you today, we have journeyed through the staggering historical collapse of a once great city, watching it violently transformed from a protected princess to an exposed widow.
We've explored the visceral, horrific realities of an ancient siege, how starvation erases human morality and drives compassionate people to the unthinkable.
And we've looked closely at the incredible, disciplined alphabetic structure of the Hebrew text, that alphabet container that the survivors built to channel their immense grief into something permanent before it eventually fractured.
The Book of Lamentations really stands as a masterclass in human resilience. It shows us how people can leverage structure, language, and art, not just to document the unbearable, but to psychologically survive it.
Which brings us back to the ashes of our own hypothetical ruined cities. If you walk out of your door tomorrow and your entire world has completely fallen apart, what kind of alphabet do you rely on? When chaos hits, what rigid structures, daily rhythms, or deeply held foundational beliefs do you use to build a container for your own pain? Does giving our deepest, most chaotic grief a strict, orderly form actually give us the power to outlast the collapse? Something to think about.